Hey Wargamers, today we're going to continue our 2019 update series of the Tau Codex by looking at Breacher teams and Strike teams, otherwise known as Fire Warriors. Now, these guys haven't changed very much since the Codex was released, but what has changed is the meta and how the Tau army as a whole functions. So that makes important differences in how you actually field Fire Warriors today as opposed to when the Codex was released. So we're going to talk about how you want to use Fire Warriors within that context, but before we do that, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead and hit subscribe. That way you don't miss any of my upcoming Tau content, including the continuation of this series. Okay, so Fire Warriors are your basic troop choice. They are relatively flexible and can dish out overwhelming firepower if properly supported in your army. And this makes them, in my opinion, one of the better troop choices in the entire game. So there's generally two ways that you can go about using Fire Warriors. One is totally ignoring them. The other is leaning into Fire Warriors, bringing a healthy contingent of them within your army. And this is the way that I am going to advocate you go in most cases. So let's start off with the profile. Both Strike teams and Breacher teams have the same profile, so we'll go over this starting off with just some of the general information about them, and then talk about the two different units separately at the end. Fire Warriors have movement 6, weapon skill 5, ballistic skill 4, strength 3, toughness 3, 1 wound, 1 attack, 2 on the Shazui, leadership 6, 7 on the Shazui, and a 4-up save. For both Strike teams and Breacher teams, the minimum unit size is 5, but it can go up to 10 for Breacher teams and 12 for Strike teams. Both Strike teams and Breacher teams have For the Greater Good ability, which allows them to fire Overwatch for their buddies. This is more important for Strike teams because Strike teams are more likely to be next to a unit that they could fire Overwatch for. It is a really big deterrent for a lot of armies charging against Tau to have a big block of Fire Warriors on their front line that can dish out a large number of pulse shots in Overwatch. So having this ability on Fire Warriors is essential. The Bonding Knife special rule allows them to automatically pass morale on a 6, and this is good on both flavors of Fire Warrior, but either way, when you lose morale on a Fire Warrior unit, it's generally going to be something like a 4, 5, or 6, so ignoring the 6s is ignoring like a third of those outcomes. And this is pretty important on a unit that you want to be sitting on an objective, holding your line, or otherwise providing some sort of tactical component to your army. So not losing guys to morale is important, and having Bonding Knife special rule allows them to do that more effectively. Focusing in a little bit more on Strike teams now, Fire Warriors can either take pulse carbines or pulse rifles. Carbines are generally the weaker option because although they are assault 2 as opposed to rapid fire, they only have range 18 as opposed to range 30. So this gives them a benefit in that 15 to 18 inch range, but overall the flexibility of having that 30 inch range as well as the way that a 30 inch range interacts with the Cotter Fireblade's volley fire ability is really important. So carbines just don't make the cut because of that alone. However, if you look at other sources of carbine fire, you see that gun drones are actually a much better choice as well. Gun drones are about 88% more points efficient than a Fire Warrior with a carbine just because they have 2 carbines. Lower ballistic skill, but 2 carbines actually works out much to the gun drone's favor. Drones have a couple things going for them. Namely, they have a higher toughness, a higher movement characteristic, they have the fly keyword, and they can perform saver protocols. Now, in general, I wouldn't recommend taking tactical drones as independent units, but instead using your larger battlesuit units like broadsides or crisis suits to bring gun drones instead. So that might be where you want to look for carbine fire if you wanted to bring carbines at all. Fire Warriors in general, though, are going to be much better suited taking the pulse rifle option. Although Fire Warriors with pulse rifles are still less points efficient than gun drones, they have a couple perks. One is that they're troops, so you can bring lots of them. They also don't compete with shield drones for drone slots. And then on top of that, they have a 30-inch range and don't suffer from threat identification protocols, so they can fire out whatever they want. That 30-inch range is also really important when we talk about the Cotter Fireblade because it means that they fire 3 shots at 15 inches, which can be augmented by either being Borcan Sept, which increases their range by 6 inches, or by taking a pulse accelerator drone, which does the same thing. So if you stack those two things on top of each other, you have range 42 inches. That means that you have a 21-inch half range for rapid fire, and at that range, you can dish out 3 shots. Now, a 10-man unit of Fire Warriors with pulse rifles can dish out 30 shots. If you can do that at 21 inches, that's a large number of shots. That is a big deterrent for anyone coming close to you, or if you're marching forward, a really easy way to overwhelm an enemy with firepower. Strike teams also have the option of taking either 2 tactical drones, a tactical drone and a guardian drone, which gives them an invulnerable save, or a turret. Now, none of these options are really a good idea in my opinion. The drones are easily picked off, giving off a kill point. The guardian drone is unnecessary because no one's firing at fire warriors with high AP weaponry in the first place, so it doesn't matter. And then the turret is tricky in the way that, yes, it's a smart missile system or a missile pod, which can be advantageous, but it ties that unit down, and if that unit moves out of range of it, that turret is destroyed. So overall, just not a good investment on any of those fronts. Just stick with the fire warriors as they are. You don't need to take drones or turrets. You can also take pistols on all of them. This is kind of a gimmicky thing that is fun if you end up in combat, but really, fire warriors are going to die in combat no matter what. So don't bother. If you have a few points, go for it, but don't be basing your army around pistols on fire warriors. It's just not going to work out. You also have the option of upgrading your Shazwi to take a marker light, and I think this is a pretty good choice in a lot of cases. Essentially, you want to prioritize taking marker lights on your fire blades and on your marksmen, but let's say you've either maxed out on those or you just can't fit any more in your list as it's constructed. Then you want to take more marker lights, and you have an option. You can either take those on something like a Pathfinder unit, or you can sprinkle it in to your fire warrior units, and I think that's the better choice because unlike Pathfinder units, marker lights spread throughout multiple fire warrior units are dispersed. They're harder to actually eliminate all of them. You have to fire at multiple units as opposed to just drilling down on one unit of Pathfinder. So that alone is beneficial, but it also means that in order to kill those marker lights, you have to go through a lot more bodies. Every single wound on a Pathfinder unit is going to kill a marker light. Every wound on a fire warrior unit will not. So that's a good way to conserve marker lights in your army, is by hiding those marker lights on your Shazwi inside of a unit of fire warriors, assuming that you can't take any more character marker light sources. As far as Sept choice goes, there are 3 that really stand out to me. Of course, Tau Sept stands out because it offers the focus fire stratagem, which is a huge benefit, especially for units like fire warriors. You can use that stratagem to take down high toughness opponents very easily. Instead of needing a 5 or a 6, suddenly you need a 4 or 5 to wound, and that's a massive increase in their efficiency. For example, if you're going from a 5 to a 4 to wound, you're increasing the number of wounds you do by 50%. That is massive. So especially considering the number of shots that Fire Warriors puts out, that is a considerable increase in damage that you can do using Focus Fire. They also have the ability to overwatch on 5s, and again, considering the volume of fire that Fire Warriors put out, that adds up quite a bit. So yes, Tau Sept is quite a strong Sept, especially for infantry like Fire Warriors. You also have the option of going with Vior-La. Vior-La kind of always has a sweet spot in my heart because it allows you to move and shoot. Now, Fire Warriors, whether they're taking carbines or pulse rifles, are going to benefit from Vior-La because they both are going to be treated as assault. Now, in terms of a pulse rifle, that means you're only firing one shot, but you can advance and fire that one shot when you want to. And that means that Fire Warriors have a lot more maneuverability and a lot more flexibility, and allows them to have better board control. That on itself is very good, but then you have the hot-blooded stratagem that allows them to fire twice. Now, consider the situation of a maxed out pulse rifle unit that's 12 Fire Warriors next to a Cadre Fireblade and let's say a Pulse Accelerator drone. You're putting out a ton of shots from one unit, and then on top of that, you're firing it again. So having the ability to fire twice is not bad either. The third Sept is Borkan because, of course, Borkan allows you to have a little bit extra range, and that can be advantageous. But really, I think that's a distant third compared to the other two choices just because of the stratagems available to infantry squads in both Vior-La and Tau Sept. The way that I would recommend bringing strike squads is as Tau Sept, alongside at least one Cadre Fireblade, and then taking between 25 and 35 Fire Warriors, depending on how you really want to do it. I've done it with as few as 20. I feel like that's a little lacking, especially with the point investment of Cadre Fireblades. Having a couple of Cadre Fireblades and then a big blob of Fire Warriors is really going to give you a good return on investment on both those Fire Warriors and those Cadre Fireblades. the way I'm going to deploy them is essentially with multiple units of fire warriors surrounding a single cadre fire blade. You can also position a commander inside that bubble as well. Let's say Shadow Sun, if she's using Cal Yun on the first 2 turns. That's going to make this stratagem even better, or rather the strategy even better. And then when you have this setup, this is going to be a really strong gun line for you. It's going to be a good buffer against charges, and also is going to prevent deep strikers in the area around your army. So having a strong infantry front line is going to be advantageous. And then if you're Tau Sept, you're able to use a focus fire stratagem, which can take out a knight pretty easily depending on the number of fire warriors that you have. Now, if you use the focus fire stratagem, now you're wounding knights on a 4 instead of a 5. Again, that's that 50% increase in output. If you surround them with a cadre fire blade and maybe bring a pulse accelerator drone, something to get that knight within range, you can kill a knight with as few as 50 fire warriors. Now, that's a large number of fire warriors. That's more than the 35 I mentioned earlier, but you're presumably going to be firing at this target with multiple things, and so you really don't have to do all the wounds using your fire warriors. In fact, you can only do 23 wounds if you're using focus fire because it requires the target to be wounded at least once already. So, not a bad way of draining down a knight or causing wounds to other units. Certainly, you can take out a large variety of opponents using focus fire and fire warriors. So, definitely the way that I would recommend doing it is running them as Tau, having them accompanied by at least 1 cadre fire blade, and bringing a nice chunk of fire warriors alongside that. More generally, I'm going to be using fire warriors to hold that front line and capture nearby objectives. They aren't going to be running across the board to grab objectives. They're going to be taking things that are in my deployment zone or in no man's land, spreading out to deny deep strikers, and otherwise having board control. This is a lot easier when you're taking Vior La, but they are potentially more effective if you're taking Tau. So that's generally how I use strike teams. So let's move on and talk about breacher teams. They're almost identical to strike teams. They have the same profile, as I mentioned, and the same special rules. They have the same options for the most part. No, you don't want to take drones with breacher teams either. And no, you don't want to take a turret with breacher teams either, especially because breacher teams are the more mobile version. They are going to be running around, and that means you are going to waste a turret if you put it down. They're going to be there 1 turn, and then they're not going to be there, and that turret's going to be destroyed. So don't buy the turret for breacher teams especially. Breacher teams are unique because they have their Pulse Blaster, and that is a 3-ranged weapon, the best range being within 5 inches at strength 6, minus 2 AP, 1 damage. That's quite the punch to land at 5 inches, and when you combine it with something like the hot-blooded stratagem, allowing them to fire twice, you can dish out a lot of high-quality shots at a very short range. This means that they're ideal for taking out kind of blobs of infantry that are guarding a well-hidden objective, getting into ruins and things like that, especially with the breach and clear stratagem. They're going to be effective at board control elements more so than being an overall offensive unit. They're not there to be your gunline unit. They're not there to be your main source of firepower. They're there for a tactical flexibility. And that's why I think breachers are actually pretty good if you use them correctly. They are definitely a tactical choice. You're not going to see them on the top tables of a tournament or anything like that. They just don't have that type of guaranteed value. But overall, I think they work pretty well, and I like taking them in fun lists and fluffy lists, and they give me some nice tactical flexibility. Breachers should always be within a Devilfish at the start of the game. You could deploy them on the board, especially if you're taking Vior La. They have a little bit more mobility, but frankly, they need to be in a Devilfish in order to get where they need to go. The point reduction in Devilfish makes this a lot more useful, a lot more likely that you're going to be able to field breachers within a list. But overall, still, that's a big investment in a single unit. And this is really why you don't see that many breachers, is because you have to take a Devilfish. As far as Sept choice goes, they're not going to be benefiting from a lot of Sept choices. The one that really stands out to me as being the most valuable is the Vior La Sept, because it gives you access to hot-blooded. It also allows you to just burst out of that Devilfish. The ability to deploy out of the Devilfish and then advance on top of that is a really great way of getting your weapons within that 5-inch range. There's been plenty of times that I've been using breacher teams and have just been able to clear a huge amount of space just by deploying out of a devilfish and advancing using that Viora Law tenet, and it takes the opponent completely by surprise. No one is expecting breachers to just burst out a devilfish and attack this unit. Now, they're going to be able to take out infantry fairly well here. They're going to have a hard time with anything that's the toughness of a biker or higher. So use them sparingly, but overall, I think they can offer some nice tactical flexibility. All right, so overall, I think that most armies are going to take at least 3 units of fire warriors, somewhere between 20 and 30, 20 and 35. That's the number of fire warriors you're generally going to see. They're all going to have pulse rifles. Sometimes you might see a unit or 2 of breachers, each in a devilfish, but overall, fire warriors with pulse rifles are the way to go in a competitive environment. So let me know what you think. Do you prefer strike teams or breacher teams? How do you use them? What are their strengths and weaknesses in your experience? I'd love to hear about it. As always, thanks for watching, and of course, happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this channel is made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our Patreon community and continuing the conversation over on the new Invasive Wargaming Discord server. Special thanks to Shifty, Scott Heater, Nick Steele, Jared Egler, Tao Oswell, Stephen Cohen, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Benjamin, Julian Peck, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Chris Kessler.